A controller then is just a C# class. It does derive from a controller-based class. You can also implement an iController interface if you want to work at a very low level. And then the public methods inside of a controller are what we call actions. That means any public method that you have inside of a controller is going to be reachable via a URL. The MVC runtime will automatically invoke these actions once it gets the information from the routing engine about what controller and what action should be invoked. And actions typically return an action result. An action result essentially tells the framework what to do next. In this case, we're telling the MVC framework, render a view for me. Render a view with the name of home. But you can also use action results to return JSON data, to return XML data, to return HTTP status codes and error messages. You can write your own custom action results to return whatever format you need from a controller. Let's come into our home controller and add a new action to the home controller called hello. And what hello will return is content. So the content method and the view method, these are both helper methods that we inherit from the base controller class, and these helper methods produce action results for us. They know how to instantiate objects of that type and populate them correctly so that the MVC framework knows how to interpret them. With the content helper, what I need to do is pass along a string like hello world. And what that is telling the MVC framework to do is just send this string down to whoever is requesting it. We're not rendering our view, we're just putting together a string. And if you've been following along, you'll know that in order to reach that action, I need to go to /home/hello, and there we have our hello world. If we look at the page source, it's literally just hello world. We're not rendering a view, we're not building HTML, we're sending just that string as content to the browser. But now let's take this one step further. What if we wanted to pass a parameter into this action? I'm going to call the parameter ID, and to see if we got it, we will format it into our content. So let's use string.format and a parameter placeholder here, and pass ID in as the parameter to substitute there. Let's build the application. Come back out to home hello, and notice that we didn't receive a parameter. It was empty. It just says hello, comma, nothing, exclamation point. But remember our default routing entry. It said when you see /home/hello/something to treat that something as an ID. So what happens when I put Scott here and hit enter? That ID parameter was picked out by the routing engine, and then the MVC runtime is looking at my controller action and saying, oh, you need an ID parameter? Well, let me look around and see if I can find one. Well, it turns out that we were able to pick one out from the route. So I'm going to take that ID value and I'm going to pass it into you. So Scott makes it all the way from the URL into my action method. But what if I didn't want to call this ID? What if I did a refactor rename and called this name? Let's do a quick build and refresh /home/hello/Scott, and that doesn't break anything. Scott is still passed along as an ID parameter. It just turns out that we didn't use it. Instead, we told the MVC runtime we need something called name, and the MVC runtime looked around and it didn't find a name. But the MVC runtime looks in more than just the routing engine data that it found inside of the URL. It looks in other places like the query string. So if I had a query string and say name equals Scott and hit enter, well, look at that. The MVC runtime, it found name equals Scott. So what we're going to find out a little bit later is that the MVC runtime, when you have a parameter on an action, it actually looks throughout the request environment to see if it can find something matching that parameter name. So it finds ID from data that was parsed out of the URL by the routing engine. It can find name by looking in the query string. We're also going to find out that it can look in posted form values.